Dedicated to empowering you with information,
to make positive choices,
and be advocates for your overall well-being.
Welcome to The Health View. Welcome to The Health View. Our topic today is the healing power of music and how one woman, Carlene Hutchins, touched every corner of the violin world. The study of sound, music, and violin making, history and anatomy, science and violin acoustics, consorts, musicology, music collections, museum collections, and the violin market. Like the immutable parts of a fiddle working together to produce one marvelous sound, all these worlds connected to one another as the interlocking themes of the fugue played out in the life of Carlene Molly Hutchins. Music listening, performance, and composition engage nearly every area of the brain that we have so far identified and involve nearly every neural subsystem. By better understanding what music is and where it comes from, we may be able to better understand our motives, fears, desires, memories, and even communication in the broadest sense. This comes from the book, This Is Your Brain on Music by Daniel Levitin. The power of music, sound, and vibration have been known for centuries to have healing effects on the mind, body, and the soul. My guests today are Quincy Whitney and fiddler Ellen Carlson. Quincy Whitney, primary arts writer for the Boston Sunday Globe, New Hampshire, weekly for 14 years, was a Eugene O'Neill Critic Fellow, Salzburg Seminar Fellow, Metropolitan Museum of Art Research Fellow, and Hosking Houses Trust Fellow, covering the 2013 Ashmolean Museum Stradivarius exhibition. A graduate of Wake Forest University, she is the author of Hidden History of New Hampshire and American Luther, Carlene Hutchins, The Art and Science of the Violin. Fiddler Ellen Carlson has a strong grasp on several musical genres. She has gained respect from her peers and students as an accomplished performer and teacher. Bluegrass Unlimited magazine called her an exceptionally talented musician for her work with the acoustic roots group High Range, and gave her a coveted highlight review for her solo album, People I Play With. Fiddler magazine picked one of her tunes, Waiting for You, as a winner in their tune contest, as well as for publication, and published her article on tips for better practicing. A highly sought-after teacher, Pete Warwick of the bluegrass supergroup Hot Rise picked Ellen to be his fiddle instructor at his first Northeast Jam camp. She also is an instructor at various festivals, including Gray Fox, Joe Val, Pemi Valley, and Fiddle Hell. She is a member of the New Hampshire State Council on the Arts Education. She plays with bluegrass, swing, western swing, country, Irish, and square dance bands. She leads the New Hampshire Fiddle Ensemble featured on WMUR's Chronicle with over 60 members and runs Fiddlehead's Acoustic Jam Camp. Welcome. I'm so delighted to have you both. And Quincy, I really want to know, what made you so interested in Carlene's life that you wanted to write a biography about her?
Biography is a long journey, and I think that many biographers would explain it as being called by the subject, in a sense. And I played violin for 1 year in the 7th grade with my identical twin. I happen to be a twin, and we both played violin, not the same violin, but we both played violin in the 7th grade. And at the end of that year, we did a recital piece, and it was very clear from the look on the teacher's face that there was one of us who was a musician and one of us who was not. So I left music behind in the 7th grade. And I think this book is sort of a way to get back to music through words. And also as a Boston Globe arts journalist, I was covering the arts and cultural news for 14 years for the NH Weekly of the Sunday Boston Globe. And about 5 years into that, started being intrigued by the idea of following stories where science and art overlap. And when I met Carlene Hutchins, she was a person who was living science, art, and music. And that was really fascinating to me.
So tell us a little bit about how her life played a central role in music.
How music actually really influenced her.
Right.
From the get-go. She was an only child, and she grew up in a very dysfunctional, complex family situation. Her mother and father were childhood sweethearts in high school. And then a couple years, just when you thought they were going to get married, her father ran away with another woman, married the woman, and the woman actually died in childbirth. 10 years later, she came back into Carlene's mother's life and married her, and then insisted his name was Thomas Maley, and Grace was his original sweetheart. When they got married, Thomas then said he felt that because he lost his first wife, the parents really ought to play a central role in their lives. So Mrs. Reeves and Mr. and Mrs. Reeves were then adopted by Grace and Thomas, which meant that every time Grace looked at Mrs. Reeves, she was reminded of the fact that her husband had betrayed her, which was very difficult.
That's difficult.
The tension between the two women was very difficult all of Carlene's life, and Carlene was an only child.
Wow.
So I could see the tension that would mount in a family like that, and so she was seeking an outlet. She loved the outdoors. She was a tomboy. She was whittling since the age of 6. And on Sunday afternoons, her parents would invite veterans from World War I to come and have Sunday dinner. And one of these soldiers gave her a toy bugle. She loved that bugle. She had it since she was age 4. She played it avidly. And then eventually that became a bugle that she played in the Girl Scouts, and she was six summers the camp bugler, which eventually gave way to the trumpet. And she was playing solo trumpet and also first chair in the orchestra and in the band in her Montclair High School. And that was her first experience with music as an outlet, but also as a kind of solo experience, because she talked about beating out the boys for that first chair position in both the band and the orchestra, and feeling a little bit of proud of herself, and at the same time that competition of competing with boys.
And she shifted. What made her go from, as she went through her years, from the trumpet to the viola?
Actually, she was teaching science at the Brearley School in Manhattan. She was teaching grade school science, and she discovered that on their off hours, the people that she taught with loved chamber music. And they played mostly strings, and so they invited her to come to a session one night, and she brought her trumpet to a Manhattan apartment. And after one session, they all turned to her and said, "The trumpet's way too loud, and we need a viola. Do you think you could trade your trumpet for a viola?" So she did. And she went to Wurlitzer's, and she bought a $75 viola, and she started taking viola lessons. And when I asked about switching from the trumpet to the viola, she said, well, it was basically the same tonal range. But the thing she really loved most about chamber music was the group experience, the power of community in music, and playing in ensemble, which meant so much more than being a first chair and lonely in the band and orchestra in high school.
Interesting. Now, music played such a part of her life that it really was healing for her, wasn't it?
Extremely. It was her outlet from the beginning when she was playing trumpet as a child, but then it was another outlet to play chamber music. And eventually, she would be tempted to actually make one.
So through her life, which she had a variety of different challenges, we know that art and science and music have a tremendous effect on one's mind, body, and spirit. And she became very interested in actually making instruments. How did all that happen?
Actually, it's because of one chamber music friend. Helen Rice was also known as the Great Lady of Chamber Music because she grew up with it and was avid about encouraging a lot of amateur and professional players to play together in her Manhattan apartment. And the first day, the fall of 1945, at the Brearley School is the first day that Carlene meets Helen Rice. Helen is at the Braley because she's going to start the music department there, and she's starting a string program, and she only has one string player. But she heard that the grade school science teacher actually played viola. So when she met Carlene that day, she had an agenda in her mind because Helen had a very pregnant sow at her family farm in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. And so she said, Carlene, I hear that you have a lot of animals in your classroom. And Carlene said, yes, I love animals. We have guinea pigs and rabbits. And she said, well, Helen said, well, how would you like a piglet? And Carlene was very excited about getting a piglet in her classroom. And she said, of course, we have to check with the principal. And Helen said, I think we could arrange that. But the deal is that if you're going to have the piglet, you have to bring your viola to our chamber music group on Friday afternoons and to play with my students. So it was a pig's bargain. She trades a viola for a pig, and that's the beginning of their friendship. And then because she's looking at the $75 viola, and she used to carve wood, she was a master woodworker by the time she was in high school, she decided she'd try to make one. And Helen thought it was absolutely crazy. It was going to take too much time, and she was crazy to do that. She said, Hutchie, if you make a viola, I'll eat my hat. 2 years later, she baked a cake in the shape of a hat, and Helen put it on her head because Carlene actually made a viola.
And she did that with having 2 children? I mean...
Actually, she started making her first viola as an outlet because she had just become pregnant. She had left her job at teaching, and she had returned home to the 3-generation household that she had grown up with Mrs. Reeves still there. So there was tension in the household. She needed an outlet. And her husband was very encouraging. Mort said, life is more than dishes, diapers, and spinach. Uh-huh. And so he did everything he could to help her start her carving of the viola. So it took her 2 years, and she made 1 viola. But she was then age 38. And I don't think of starting a career and a life calling at age 38. I think it's pretty late. So she was really an unlikely person to do what she did.
Interesting. Now, Ellen, from your perspective being a musician, just imagine at 38, someone making an instrument. Now, from what she made and being a professional musician, what is the difference that it's made to you regarding music in your world? And what is the difference of the instruments?
Well, Carlene, just as a person, was very inspiring to me, and she made really wonderful instruments. And when I met her, it took me a while to get over there to meet her, and when I first played her instruments, I was just astounded that they were beautiful.
In what way were they beautiful?
Well, they were just so resonant and so big sounding, and it was, it was just I'm playing what's called a mezzo violin, which is the only instrument that's like our regular string quartet instruments. The other ones, which Quincy will probably talk about more, are all made to really work together, and it is amazing how they do. And when I play one of Carlene's instruments, it just I don't know, the resonate is the word that I can't get away from, but it just takes in everything. And so I was inspired by her instruments, but I was also inspired by Carlene, just in the fact I've always been a fiddle player since I was younger, but that was a side passion of mine that I didn't want to ruin my love of fiddling. But when I met Carlene, I was teaching middle school math, and I said, boy, this woman made a viola when she was 38, and when I met Carlene, I was just in my 40s. And I said, wow, so maybe I can still just follow my passion, because Carlene was so passionate about what she was doing. And I said, I've just got to bite the bullet and do it. And so I quit my teaching job and decided to follow music. And it's been the best move I've made in my life.
And how have you followed music? What has it done for you?
So, there's not a day that goes by that I don't really enjoy what I'm doing. And I love teaching, too. So I teach a lot, and I have some great students, and it's just so inspiring to see the students. I have a lot of women who are in their 40s and 50s and 60s just starting to play an instrument. And they're getting together and playing at each other's houses now, and they're having a good time, and they're getting out and just enjoying the music. So that's the key thing to me. I perform also, but the real thing I just love is just seeing so many people play together. And I do that with the New Hampshire Fiddle Ensemble. I bring 60 people together, ages 8 to 86, and they're all playing together and having a good time. And that's what I like.
And how often do you do that?
Yeah.
I do that in the fall through the spring. We have our big concerts in the spring, and then
So you do it weekly, monthly?
we get together every other week. And then,
Wow.
but then the people, what's great is that people also get together on their own and play the music that I've provided for them. And yeah, we just have, it's about having a good time.
There's such power in the community of
Yeah.
music. And that
Yes.
really is what Carlene found. We have yet to talk about the major health issue that
Right.
she had
Yes.
in 1956.
Let's start and do that, and then go to the mezzo, and then
Sure.
get back
Yeah.
to that. Go
In
ahead.
56, she was diagnosed with breast cancer, and she had a sister die of breast cancer. So her family was pretty alarmed. And you would think that she would be very concerned at that point, but she was still so passionate about her music that she heard that her anesthesiologist, who was Dr. Virginia Apgar, she had not met Apgar yet. Apgar is internationally known for the Apgar score that she developed for prenatal, the newborn, to judge the newborn health
Right.
at delivery.
Correct.
There's 5 traits based on her name, the Apgar score. And Carlene had not met Virginia, but she did hear from her doctor that she was a violist. Well, Carlene took that as a huge message from the universe because she took her viola number 23 with her to the hospital and hid it in the closet in the hospital room because she wanted to show her anesthesiologist the viola. And word has it that when Dr. Apgar walked in and she explained that she had a viola in the closet, Carlene gave her the viola, and then Dr. Apgar played viola right there in Harkness Pavilion to all the thrill of the nurses and listening to the doctor play viola. So they became fast friends. But I guess we should basically stop at that point because they were such good friends that Carlene had 2 children and a husband at that point, and Dr. Apgar didn't have a family. She didn't have siblings, and she didn't have children. So really, Dr. Apgar became adopted into the Hutchins family. She would do all kinds of things with them as a family. And 3 months after this diagnosis, when Carlene was having her treatments, and 3 months after that, she turned to Virginia Apgar one day and said, I see that there's a really cool-looking maple shelf in the phone booth at the Harkness Pavilion on the first floor, and I think it would make a good viola. And Virginia said, well, what do you think we should do about that? And Carlene said, well, I don't know. What should we do? And Dr. Apgar said, well, I guess we just should take it. So the 3 of them, P.D. Evans was a woodworking teacher at Brierley and a friend of Carlene's. And so Carlene and Virginia and P.D. stole that telephone booth shelf. It's a long story about how that happened. And that eventually...
They went undercover, did they not?
And eventually it was used in a viola that Carlene taught Virginia to make.
Now, as you were saying about her health, so she, in fact, also was diagnosed with cancer and had to be going through treatment that Dr. Apgar helped her with.
Right.
And through that process of that treatment, Dr. Apgar encouraged her to physically play her instrument.
Music became physical therapy.
Exactly.
And chamber music became even more important. Dr. Apgar played amateur viola and played with the Teaneck Symphony and invited Carlene to play with the Teaneck Symphony. So then she was playing with a community symphony orchestra. She was doing that, and she was taking lessons, and at the same time she was playing quartets whenever she could because it both physically helped her and the doctor's orders was, keep flapping.
Keep flapping to be able to move things and get it going.
Right.
Now, in the end, she kind of collaborated with someone, right, in the scientific area. Tell us about that and how she took that information, working together with that gentleman, to be able to create what ended up later. Did she not create the octet?
Yeah, she was apprenticing. Part of that stress that she faced was that she tried to do so many things at once.
Right.
In addition to maintaining a household and raising children. She was apprenticing to Karl Berger, who was a German luthier near Carnegie Hall, and he was teaching her how to make her instruments better. At the same time, she had met Frederick Saunders, and a retired Harvard physicist who was a chamber music player also. And they started doing hundreds of experiments about how to make a more resonant violin. So she's now got two apprenticeships going, one with Lutherie and one in science. And then by this time, the press starts to cover her a little bit as the New Jersey housewife violin maker, because she's wearing that dress that looks like Leave It to Beaver's mother, and she's in the kitchen and she's carving fiddles in her kitchen. And so the Wall Street Journal and other papers started covering her. And then Henry Brandt was a Vermont composer who knocks on her door one day after this kind of coverage and just wanted to meet this lady. And he proposed the idea that, we have consorts of recorders in medieval and Renaissance music, and we have consorts of viols, but we don't really have a family of violins. Do you think, Carlene, that you could make one? And she agreed to try to do that in 5 minutes, but it took her almost the next 10 years to invent this new family of violins called the violin octet. And the octet is 8 violins across the range of a piano, from an 11-inch treble to a 7-foot contrabass. So it's across the range of the human voice. So the instruments' names are the treble, the soprano, the mezzo, which is the one we have here, which is the closest to the regular violin, and then the alto, the tenor, the baritone, the bass, and the contrabass.
Now, from a musician point of view, that type of creation that she did, how did she profoundly impact the music field and the violin field by so doing that?
Well, there's no music written for any of that kind of instrumentation, and so that whole process had to go on. But I have never heard the octet completely all together live, but I've heard recordings, and I've heard so much about it. But it's just those 8 instruments sound like a full orchestra because of the way they resonate together, and they're made just to really be played together. And I played one of her, trebles, which is really small, and they make small violins for children that sound horrible, and these instruments were beautiful. It was amazing how clean and clear they were.
Now, this would be a perfect time, if you would, you kindly share with us the difference of a regular violin and her violin.
Sure. All right, so this is a regular violin here, and this was made by Jonathan Cooper, who was influenced by Carlene and actually studied a little bit with her.
And he was from Maine.
He's from Maine, yeah.
And in actuality, Carlene ended up in New Hampshire, did she not?
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
she summered in New Hampshire.
She summered in New Hampshire, and that was probably part of the connection that you had.
That's where I met her. I met her in Wolfboro, New Hampshire.
And she summered there.
She had a cabin.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so
and then this is Carlene's what's called a mezzo, and it's a wider like this, but if you look at it this way, it's also thinner.
Yes. And what does that do for the difference of the quality of the tone, the vibration, and how it resonates within the human body?
Well, yeah, these 2 instruments sound fairly familiar because they're both, and it's the only instrument that Carlene made that is like our typical stringed instruments. It just resonates a little bit differently, and it's probably hard to hear on TV, and it's even hard to hear for people who aren't violin players. But it's...
Does it play differently? Do they play differently?
It feels the same, which is important, actually. And
right, as far as how you're playing it.
Yeah.
Ergonomically,
right. And just hitting the notes and pitch and things like that. Although Carlene did make 2 kinds of mezzos. One was slightly longer than the other, but this was the typical one.
When you speak of a mezzo is what?
Is this violin that's made just like
so that's the name of the instrument.
It's the third one. It's the third one in the family.
Yes.
Yeah. So it just, when I play with others, like especially when I play with my large ensemble of amateurs and professionals of 60 people, this instrument is just amazing how it pulls everybody in, and it I think makes people play more in tune because they can really hear those pitches. It's really clean and clear, and even though there's 60 people, you can hear it. It's it's filling the room.
And are you the only Hutchins instrument in the 60?
Well, yeah. Although one of my students plays a mezzo that was made by somebody else who.
Oh.
Another person that I know who was inspired by Carlene, who I introduced, and then they learned how to make a mezzo. So.
And how many of them are out in the world?
I don't
know. There are almost 500.
Almost 500. And the other parts of the instruments from the octet, how many of them are out there?
Well, she made 7 octets, and there are 4 of them in museums.
Okay.
One is in Edinburgh, Scotland. One is in Stockholm, Sweden. One is at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, and one is at the National Music Museum in Vermillion, South Dakota. And then the two of them are owned and played by a live consort, an ensemble that named for Hutchins, called the Hutchins Consort, out of San Diego.
Very interesting. So how are you going to begin to share with us the talent and her artisan in that instrument and how you help it to come alive?
Yeah, so I'll play a fiddle tune, actually, because I'm a
Okay.
fiddler. I'm not a violin player. And
Yeah.
I think when I first met Carlene, she appreciated that because she had had so much conflict within the violin world.
Really?
And that she was happy to hear some fiddling coming out of it.
What's the difference between fiddling and violin players, just for our audience?
Well, a fiddle player will tend to learn by ear and play a different style, whereas classical violin players have a lot of them have a certain repertoire that they're required to learn, and they're learn by reading music, and so the vibrato is different, and so it's.
And the octet was very controversial from day one because it challenged that traditional violin world to think about another set of instruments, different tones and different ergonomics, and 300 years of repetition. The whole violin world is based on repetition and copying of the old Italian masters. So it doesn't lend itself to flexibility and improvisation as much as the fiddle world.
Right.
And was there music composed specifically for these instruments that is out there?
For the octet, yeah, there was eventually, and it's great music, and Carlene had.
It's probably about 500 pieces now, and there were about 300 within the first 20 years. But she still was 20 years trying to get these instruments accepted in America. This is why the one in Edinburgh was the first time she was really getting positive reinforcement, and it was from 3 groups of Europeans. Edinburgh, Sweden, and Russia, all were much more open to the idea way before the Americans were.
Isn't that interesting? Play for us.
All right, so I'll play a very common fiddle tune
Okay.
that was in the Civil War series called "The Shokin Farewell."
How beautiful. Thank you. I was also a violin player for a number of years of my life. And when you hear this is my first time listening to this. It's almost as if a speaker is coming out from within that instrument.
Right. Yeah.
There's a fullness in it.
Right.
I mean, the violin as an instrument itself has a beautiful tone. And the violin has always been known as an instrument that helps to heal because of the vibrations. That's why you can feel emotion with it, from happiness to sadness to joy, as well as connect. But really, listening to this for the first time, you can really hear this vibration that is occurring deep within that, that's flowing through. And what is your perspective as a musician in listening to that?
Yeah, I mean, you hear what I'm talking about with resonance.
Resonance.
And
it
You feel it as a player, don't you?
You totally feel it, yeah.
And you hear it as a listener. It expands. That energetic vibration expands. And so from your perspective, from a healing, mind, body, spirit perspective, this wonderfully crafted instrument, how have you found it to benefit people in their response to their listening and feeling? What has it done for you?
Wow.
Well, I was just thinking about those 60 people that you gather together all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
And now
They must.
it's a communal thing, and it's also individual, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. And, I mean, there's a woman who's a great violin player who plays in my ensemble, and she teaches in Goffstown, and every time she hears this and how it really just, you know, it just fills things up, she's just in awe of it. And, you know, it just, the dynamics you can get out of this, and I wish I was a better player to really pull those dynamics out of this instrument, because I know there's more I can get out of this instrument. As I get better, I just find more and more things. And so it really inspires me to, you know, keep on working at it. And
this is the really interesting thing to me. I think what you're talking about is what in my research is the huge difference between a plucked instrument and a bowed string.
Absolutely.
The bowed string is you're able to elongate it and control it,
exactly,
like the human voice, and it's the only instrument that allows you to get close to the human voice. So in a way, it's the instrument that lets you sing closest to the human soul. But it's the bowed string that is the most complex for scientists to understand. They still don't fully understand the complexity of what the bowed string, what's happening with the bowed string.
Right.
But it does resonate longer because you can draw it out. Whereas the plucked string, like the harpsichord and the clavichord, is strictly, you know,
it's
one
that
moment.
and then the vibration. Right. It's a,
although I have to say this instrument is really
Like
one of the
pizzicato.
best plucking instruments there is out there.
Actually, the pizzicato is the most amazing of all. When you hear all 8 instruments do pizzicato, you would swear that there were double the number of instruments.
Yeah, it is
interesting.
amazing.
Again, because of the echo effect and the vibration and the tonation. Now, you had played, and you were at Carlene's, her last actually public, in a sense, appearance related to the time that she died, related to being there to honor her at her funeral. And you chose a piece of music to play. And what was it that you played?
Well, I played this bluegrass tune called Jerusalem Ridge, because I would go to Carlene's. I would go over there on Wednesdays.
And this was in New Hampshire in the summer when she summered there?
No, she was living there at this point, and
Okay, so
I was
she lived
actually
there
I was able to get out of school early, and I would drive over to Carlene's, and I would just play her instruments. And I had eventually bought this, but I would still go over and play her instruments. And she liked hearing that tune because it went over the range of the instrument.
Really?
And so that's why I thought I should play that. Her daughter asked me to play something lively, and so I picked that one.
So that is all-encompassing. Would you be kind enough to play that for us here so we can really hear that all-encompassing sound and vibration?
Cover a lot of ground. You cover a lot of musical ground. It makes me think about Carlene's life.
Yeah.
She covered a lot of ground
in the
violin world.
She did, definitely
She really did. And when you think about it, how many people do you believe she impacted by her creation and the combination of what she did in her lifetime?
I think it's really hard to estimate, but you can look at it in several different ways. She taught about 50 students to make instruments.
And they're still making them now.
Several of them are able to. There are probably 5 to 6 makers now that could make the octet instruments if people wanted them. Wow. And then there's also another generation there's 3 makers that have actually made another whole octet based on her plans. There's one in Ithaca, New York, Bob Spear. There's one, Pio Montanari made the first Italian octet, inspired by Carlene. And Joris Wouters in Belgium made the first Belgian octet. So those are just the makers. But when you think about the players and the scientists who really worked with musicians to get the octet accepted in Edinburgh and in Stockholm and in St. Petersburg, a lot of people players and makers and composers. Some of the composers were the most excited because you have a new palette of sound in stringed instruments. Because the quartet, it has some gaps in the tonal areas of alto and tenor. You know, the quartet isn't able to cover the total range of a piano. And so what the octet has is a new palette of sound in stringed instruments.
And so the science of it, when you say scientists were involved in literally bringing that art together with music, how extensive was their involvement? What were they helping to discover so that she could literally integrate that into her instruments?
Well, basically, it was. I would say that everyone that really came in contact with Carlene was either musical or scientific or both. And the group that ended up creating the Catgut Acoustical Society was, 3 scientists and Carlene, and those 3 scientists were all string players. One was a violin and violist, that was Dr. Saunders, and the other 2 were cellists. So there was this scientific string connection with a lot of the people that formed the Catgut Acoustical Society. So I think it was this. The biggest thing I would say about that is that Carlene changed the paradigm. There was a paradigm based on competition, and luthiers guarded their secrets for 3 centuries, and she suggested the opposite. What if we shared information? What if we published our papers and had meetings and talked about a better way to make an instrument? And what if we shared what we're finding about acoustics? She and Saunders believed in sharing what they found out. Just like with respect to players, she always wanted to put an instrument in a player's hand. She had an open door policy at 112 Essex. Anybody knocked on the door, if they were a player, she went and got an instrument and put it in their hands. She was not at all possessive about it. She would loan her instruments. She wanted to share the music, and she wanted to share what she knew. And I think that paradigm was just totally opposite from what they had done for 3 centuries.
Interesting. And you used to go and play her instruments, you said. What would you do? Just be hanging out with her and testing out her instruments?
Yeah, I pretty much. I would just play the different instruments and experiment. And she offered for me to take them home.
She had to be thrilled.
And she would just
to hear them.
And she would just listen. And then we would talk about various things in her life. And she was an inspiring woman.
And she was the first woman to literally make.
Yes, she was in 3 male-dominated fields.
Right.
Which made her, she was invisible in many ways outside the field of violin making, but she was visible in many ways in the field of violin making because she was the only woman, which made it rather difficult. But she was invisible because of gender to begin with, but also because she was, to me, she was controversial because she was a game changer.
Yes, and how was she that game changer?
She was a game changer because she was an outsider. Almost every step of the way, she was an outsider. When she decided to give her trumpet up and learn strings to go to viola, she was an outsider, teaching herself that. She was an outsider as a biologist, choosing to sort of teach herself acoustical physics by carving fiddles in her kitchen. I mean, talk about unlikely, that she would even get to the point where she could master making 1 viola. She made almost 500 instruments, and she eventually won the highest honor of the Acoustical Society of America, the same honor that her mentor won in 1954. She won it in 1998.
And what was that honor called?
It's called the Honorary Fellowship from the Acoustical Society of America.
For the work that she had contributed.
Yes.
And she was quite an amazing hands-on teacher.
She was.
Oh, my goodness.
That was her technique when she had classes in her garage. She did this for about 10 years, where she had this little violin making class that she would hold like on Friday afternoons and even throughout the winter. So she has like 50 students, and I'd say half of them are ones that today could make an octet instrument.
And before she even delved into creating the instruments and delving into that, she was an educator also, correct?
Yes, she was passionate about teaching.
Passionate about
teaching. She got a graduate degree at Bank Street College of Education. She believed in progressive education because she felt like she had the benefit. She had a very inspirational, can-do kind of attitude from her mother, who believed in hands-on learning, and Girl Scouts became her life classroom outside, and playing with boys and the tomboy kind of existence taught her self-reliance. So she became this kind of person that could believe that she could do anything if she'd just stick with it. And she had this pattern of going into the unknown and figuring out that she could figure it out somehow. And I think a lot of us can benefit by that pioneering spirit of saying, if I just try it, I can figure it out.
Yes, and as she was figuring it out, utilizing it as a way to help her through the challenges in her life as well as helping her with her health, because she was constantly playing and using it. And fascinating enough, was there particular music that she loved besides the one that you played at her funeral that you found that when you were practicing there that she enjoyed listening to hear the different extensions of the ranges of what this instrument can do?
She really liked the pieces that use the full range of the instrument, which a lot of fiddling doesn't actually. A lot of fiddling stays on D and A strings or A and E. But yeah, she liked those kinds of pieces. And I know she liked classical music quite a bit, but I didn't play a whole lot of that. So, but she.
Would there be another piece that you'd like to play to show the other aspects of this?
All right, let's see. Keep bumping into the arms here. All right, here's a like more of a country kind of number.
Now, when you teach your students music on this instrument, is it different from how you would teach them on the traditional violin?
No, and I actually play both of them, now. I mean, it's pretty much the same thing. Okay. It's just sometimes this is so overpowering that it's hard to even hear the student play.
Really?
Yeah.
So from your perspective, knowing this instrument now, what would you say was the difference that Carlene has made to the music world?
I think just opening people's minds up to the possibilities that exist out there. And, yeah, I think it's going to still take a long time for people to even know what she's done.
And why is that?
Because, as Quincy said, it's a lot of people aren't so accepting to these new ideas, and a lot of people don't even know who Carlene Hutchins is.
And that's part of why we're trying to do this show today, to help people understand the healing power of music, as well as to understand how one person can make such a huge difference. And when you say it will take a number of years for people to really understand the depth of her work, why is that?
I think it has to do with changing people's minds
about
what they don't know, that they are stuck in one groove and one assumption.
And that is...
She was criticized by luthiers for bringing science into the workshop, when actually acoustics is music, music is acoustics.
It is.
And they've always been connected.
Right.
She was suggesting that a contemporary instrument could actually be competitive and even better than an old Italian instrument. And that upset the dealers, because they make a lot of money by selling an instrument because of a label rather than how it sounds. She was encouraging the player to feel it and hear it rather than trust a dealer to say, this is the one you want to buy. So she was upsetting the apple cart just because that was what made common sense to her. But the violin world has been based for 3 centuries on doing things the same way, on copying old Italian masters and repeating patterns and even making instruments look old. People forget that Stradivari was a contemporary maker in his own time. Right. He didn't make instruments looking old. And he was also an experimenter. They criticized her because she was, too experimental. Well, she was actually following in the footsteps of Stradivari because every Strat is different, because he was always experimenting with how to make it better acoustically.
Very interesting. It truly is. So from your perspective on your want to share her work with the public and to let people know about literally the genius behind all of her methods, what are you hoping happens with this book and coming out and telling people about her and what she's done?
I guess I'm rooting for, I think of my favorite biography, which is Seabiscuit, because it was a most unlikely idea for the author to pitch writing a biography about a horse.
Right.
And this horse was a very unlikely racehorse to do what he he did, he or
Right.
she did.
Yes.
Carlene's the same way. She's a long shot. You start carving in your kitchen at the age 38. You don't expect to win the Acoustical Society of America highest honor years later. So I think her model, she teaches us to just keep believing in the possibility of the next goal we might have, and that hard work pays off. And don't be afraid to change people's assumptions. I think that's her whole life. She was willing to ask the thing about being an outsider is there's no sacred jargon, right? If you're an outsider, you don't know what the sacred cows are and what's supposed to be honored. You know, the quartet. There are people that feel the octet threatens the quartet, which is absurd. But these are ideas that people get really married to. And I think that's what she's done, is she's helped us open up our minds about helping us see our own blind spots.
And it's interesting that she would have people, as you would say, hold, feel, and play the instrument. When you hold, feel, and play this instrument, Ellen, what happens to you? Because that, I'm sure, is what she had hoped would happen to other musicians. What is it?
No, I think music is totally very spiritual for me, and I know that it was for Carlene. And it's the whole resonating and of the instrument through your body, and it's such a physical thing to do.
Because the vibration, we know the vibration, the whole aspect of the acoustics has been known for centuries upon centuries that it has a healing effect on the cellular constitution of our bodies. Yeah. Figuring that majority is made of water, correct? And so it responds to that vibration in acoustics. And if you're able to make that fuller connection and feel it as a musician, which is what you're saying happens to you. Right. So do your students feel it? Do they see the difference?
Well, I only hope so, but I certainly see spark, you know. And
spark here, spark there.
Yeah, and that's what we want, you know.
There's also a medical musical story that we didn't quite finish about Hutchins and Apgar. That when they stole that shelf, it inspired. Apgar was thinking about that shelf, and then she asked Carlene if she would teach her to make a viola. So they used that maple from that phone booth shelf to make the first viola. And then the natural progression for both of them was, oh, well, can you teach me to make another instrument? So they ended up making a quartet together, and it was called the Apgar Quartet. And Virginia made 3 instruments, 3 and a half, and didn't really finish the cello before she died, but Carlene finished the cello. And now the quartet, the Apgar Quartet, is 4 instruments that are housed at the New York Presbyterian Hospital. And on Mondays, there is a College of Physicians and Surgeons chamber music group that play. And once a year, they do a concert in honor of Apgar on these instruments.
Isn't that something? Do we have any of her instruments here in New Hampshire since she ended up staying here? How many years did she live here besides summering here?
She lived about 8 years full-time in New Hampshire. She moved at age 90 from Montclair. But summered for 60 summers on Winnipesaukee.
And that was very inspiring.
And actually, you're asking me about the instruments. I'm really trying to find the Hutchins instruments.
You are.
They're all over the country and all over the world. And
how can people in our audience help you to find those instruments?
I actually have a website, a new website with a form on it, which starts with, do you own a Hutchins fiddle? And I'd like, it's a questionnaire like, are you a collector? Are you a player? Where are you located? That kind of thing. What was your experience playing the instrument? How did you meet Carlene? Those kinds of things. I'd like to find the stories.
Yes. What's the website?
www.QuincyWhitney.com.
www.QuincyWhitney.com. That's fantastic.
So I'd love to find the fiddles.
Okay.
I'm looking for the fiddles.
Go on the website, huh?
Yeah, the interesting thing.
Yeah, I got to log you in.
Yeah.
Has there ever been a concert that has taken a number of her instruments and been played together to see the quality? And where was that done?
There's in Ithaca, New York, in 2005. There was a whole conference on the octet called Octet 2005, and Carlene was supposed to be able to go to that, and unfortunately, she fell just before it happened, so she never got to witness it. But there was an amazing concert that I will never forget of 2 octets, basically 2 octets and about 10 soloists, all playing together. It was I write about it in my book. It was an amazing experience, and I keep envisioning how cool it would be to have an octet convention where you get the Italian octet and the Belgian octet, and the Ithaca Octet, and
Bring them all
the
together.
one in California, and bring them all together.
Bring them together
it
here
would
in
be
New
quite-
Hampshire.
it would
Wouldn't
be
that be
quite
something?
amazing.
Wouldn't that be something to bring
really
them
would be.
back right here and have an amazing... Now, well, when you felt that music, Whitney, when you experienced it, what did it do for you?
Oh, it's such a different... because I'm not a musician, I
Right.
really wish I was, but you feel
But
the
you have an
vibration as a
appreci-
listener.
There you go.
But also you feel this holistic tone coming at you because you have a whole range, across the range of a piano. You have all of... And there's new sounds in these stringed instruments that people haven't heard before because we haven't had a whole family that's across the tonal range. So it's a holistic experience. It's it was an epiphany for me to hear this.
Yes.
Concert.
And from the perspective of vibration, music, and healing, you had mentioned, Ellen, that it's very spiritual to you in playing it. What would you want people to understand about Carlene's work and the effect that she has made for people and listeners related to the opportunity to hear the music, feel the music, and get a sense of what happens to them in their own peacefulness or sense of health and well-being?
Well, Carlene was certainly passionate about what she was doing, and even though she was very scientific about everything, she was also she knew that there were tap tests and things like that were also part of just feeling the instrument, and she was, she wanted to put energy into the instruments, and that was important to her. She knew whatever the metaphysics or whatever the energy that happens.
And the energy in wood.
The energy in wood, the energy just...
The fact that the miracle of the violin to me is that every piece of wood is different, even if it's cut right next to each other on the same trunk. It's all different acoustically.
Exactly.
So that's what the intuitive nature of the violin maker is involved in, is that intuitive sense of how it feels and how far to carve and how thick to make the plate and how consistent to make it. It all is in feel as much as it's in the science.
It's amazing because everything is made out of energy. And we as human beings are very receptive to energy. And the wood itself having that energy in it. And they always say the intent of what we do energetically is critical. And her intent was for a healing basis. That's why she really was trying to discover the way to develop this, to design it, to create it, so that it would have the full embodiment of all those perspectives that will really relate and connect and resonate with the human body.
And that was also the paradigms that she changed. She was inviting that player, not the dealer, to make a decision. She was including, we're sharing information, we're not hiding it, which is all a paradigm that's a positive energy.
Surely, very much so. But that's the difference that she did related to how violins were sold before, right? So she wanted people to feel it, experience it,
she was
see the
passionate about the
difference.
community experience. I mean, she started out loving ensemble because it brought people together and very inclusive feeling about the whole thing.
And so your goal is to someday, in the near future, bring all of these octets together and have an amazing, beautiful, beautiful symphony of all of that. Are these instruments at all available to purchase? Or are they extinct?
There are luthiers. There are about 10 luthiers, maybe 5 now, that make these instruments. And I guess that's another thing I should think about for my website, is listing those luthiers who can make those instruments.
I would
That's
encourage you to do that, because as you are literally honoring her life with this book and telling her story, what you're doing is raising awareness about a woman who really rised above everything and really created an amazing octet of violins at the different levels that has never, ever been done before.
Right. There were 2 people before her that tried. Unfortunately, didn't get quite the support and didn't have some of the science to help with the scaling to figure out. But there are people that have wanted to talk about a family of violins for 400 years, since Michael Pretorius. In 1619, he showed woodcuts of a family of violins, but didn't describe it because he said, everyone knows about the violin band.
Surely. Well, Quincy, what I'd love to do is I'm going to show your book up here, and the book is named American Luthier by Quincy Whitney, Carlene Hutchins, The Art and Science of the Violin. And as a summary, what is it that you would like people to know about how Carlene had mixed the art and connected it with the science and music and the difference she made for all of us who have the ability to hear and feel the vibration of music in her work.
Maybe it's the David and Goliath thing, that you could change a paradigm. One person can do that simply by a mindset and a determination. And she was a long shot, very unlikely person to do this. So I guess it's inspiration to all of us to try to pursue what we want to do and not let the naysayer voice inside of us dissuade us from that.
And Ellen, what would you wrap up and say from a musician point of view very quickly?
That everybody should be playing music no matter what level you're at, because it's a awesome thing to have in your life.
And it's very, very healing.
Yeah,
It truly does connect the mind, body, and spirit. Would you like to just end our show with the piece that you played at her funeral?
Same.
Yes?
Okay.
If you'd like. And again, I want to thank you both very much. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
The preceding program